Here we are looking at the chart of the solar eclipse that is at 2:41 a.m. Eastern Time on June 21st. Many astrologers draw up charts for the winter and summer solstice and even for the equinoxes. Why? Because the solstices and equinoxes are the cardinal points of astrology. They're the cardinal points in time. The cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, start the seasons. And in fact, when the sun changes from a mutable into a cardinal sign, that becomes part of the 90-degree axis upon which we keep time. And so the entire astrological calendar begins every year anew when the sun, from Earth's point of view, enters the tropical sign of Aries. That's what the cardinal points are. So when events occur on a solstice or equinox, and I would argue more so for the solstices even than the equinoxes, they indicate a very important issue. When we look at new moons or full moons or eclipses, we always want to see what's the primary aspects or aspect that they are making and what other aspects are close or exact in the sky at the same time. When we look at the eclipse point itself and we want to see what it is aspecting, there is one clear, powerful signal that is coming from this eclipse that is obvious. And there's another one that is maybe more powerful, but not obvious. And we will get to that in a moment. But first, I want to talk about this sun-moon quincunx to Saturn. We have, and this is technically a partile quincunx, partile in Ptolemaic aspects, meaning in the same degree. So they are both in the first degree of their sign, Saturn in the first degree or 0 degrees of Aquarius, retrograde, and the sun and the moon in the first degree of Cancer or 0 degrees of Cancer. And the fact that this quincunx is so exact really tells a story. And the story that it tells, with retrograde Mercury, by the way. Okay, yes, Venus is retrograde too, and whoops, so is Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto. But the fact that Mercury is cohabitating, that's in the same sign, it's a little wide for what many modern astrologers would consider a conjunction, but that Mercury retrograde in Cancer increases our sensitivity because Mercury in Cancer is intellectually sensitive. The textbooks say, well, it's a bit, self-restrained when it comes to communication. Mercury in Cancer may not talk freely unless it feels safe, but it's that whole thing of being very sensitive. The reason why Mercury in Cancer may not speak as freely as, let's say, Mercury in Gemini or Aries or Leo is because that Mercury in Cancer is always being considerate of what other people might say or think or how they might react. Some of that may be based on fear of being rejected or ridiculed or whatever other things. But the point here is that Mercury retrograde in Cancer is also feeding into this eclipse. But the quincunx energy between the eclipse point and Saturn is this. Quincunxes are aspects of adjustment. Nothing feels right about a quincunx because they're two planets, or the 2 points on a quincunx. Here, I say 2 planets, it's the sun and moon together as one planet, if you will, and Saturn as the other, because the 2 planets involved, or the 2 points of the quincunx, in the Ptolemaic sense, he called this an inconjunct because the planets could not see each other. They were not in communication, and yet they were on the same page somehow. And so the quincunx becomes like an invisible point. Unlike a square, which can be difficult, in a square, we actually get to work the energy directly. In a trine, there's no need to work it. It just flows. But in a quincunx, we can work the energy, but it doesn't seem to apply because we have to work at it indirectly, because when we work at it directly, it doesn't solve anything. So this eclipse quincunx Saturn, to me, represents Saturn having moved into the next sign, the future, Aquarius. Remember, Saturn is retrograding in Aquarius. So although it's tipped into the future, it's retrograding back into Capricorn, and it actually retrogrades. It reaches Capricorn on July 1st. So what we're experiencing now is this disjunction, this misalignment between the sensitivity that we can feel, this hypersensitive Cancerian energy. Remember, the crab lives in the intertidal zone. That's the most dynamic, nutrient-rich place on the planet, where every day the tide comes up, it goes out. It comes up, it goes out. Every day, up, down, up, down. It's always changing. So a successful crab is one that becomes so hypersensitive that it knows when the tide's going to change before it changes, so it can not be left high and dry, and so it doesn't get washed out into the deeper seas. And so it basically builds up protection against the changing tide, its hard outer shell, or the hard outer shell of another crustacean that's no longer living. It's now taken that and wedged it into a cave or under a rock, because that's why the connection between Cancer energy, family, home, homeland. Remember, the United States is a Cancer. I mean, the United States may act tough globally, but it does that because it's fearful about losing the home part of its homeland, which of course is a whole illusion that we're not going into right now, although it's certainly important that we do go into that illusion, because that's part of what's happening now. This eclipse is the eclipse of the illusions that have been fed by Neptune's dreams and hopes and wishes and idealism, and how this eclipse is in fact bumping up into the misalignment of that authority, of that false authority that's holding some idealistic, humanistic Aquarian place into the future. There are many people who say the Aquarian age began around the time of the American and French revolutions, both of which had some pretty high idealism wrapped around it, but both of them fell quite short in practicality of what those ideals were. The first thing I said was the obvious, and that was the quincunx between the eclipse point and Saturn. Where I'm going here is to that treacherous, feared, unknown land of the septiles. And I would like to now put a chart up of this eclipse, and yet I'm going to take out all the traditional aspects, and I'm only going to show you the septiles. And we're now going to look at this chart with only the septiles. That's the 1/7 of a circle. The biseptiles, that's 2/7 of a circle, about 102 degrees. And the triseptiles, which is a little bit over 154 degrees. So these 3 points, which are totally non-zodiacal, non-decimal, complicated, and yet incredibly powerful. Okay, so here we are looking at the identical chart, but we've taken out all the regular aspects, and we've replaced them with purple lines that represent the septiles. Again, the thicker lines represent the more exact septiles, but the fact is that what we see here we see planets that are on 1, 2, 3, 4 points of a 7-pointed star. So what I'm pointing out here, and this is something that's easy to miss because most of us don't look at septiles, and even if we did, we don't know what to do with them. Septiles are alien, they're otherworldly, they're complicated. This eclipse, although it's easy to get distracted by the obvious quincunx of the eclipse point to Saturn, that's 150 degrees, the 154-degree triseptile to Jupiter and Jupiter-Pluto is actually more powerful because it's tied into a planetary configuration. To learn more about the influence of septiles on this eclipse, watch my June mid-month update. Go to the bio for the link. Thanks.